Happy another Sunday, everybody. I had a little surprise when I went live where it says, you changed the name of your stream. Do you want to go to a different live stream? And I said, no! So I had to figure it out. Glad to see everybody again. We're still here, so we're going to keep going. And, yeah, I'm kind of backlit today. Nothing much I could do about that. The sun coming in the window is bright enough that even with the lights on in here, it doesn't light in front of me, so I'll just be this shadowy figure today. And I've kind of been changing my mind on wrenches or no wrenches. That is the question, and finally decided that what they do is help you with the problem of people cloning accounts. So once it's unlikely that we'll have clone accounts here, but when I see somebody I know and trust, I'll just give them a wrench, unless they're kind of dodgy, and we'll, just make it that way I don't have to worry about clone accounts. So if somebody comes up with a name that you all know and it isn't a wrench, then you know that there's a problem, that this is probably a fake account. So just let me know and we'll figure it out. Oh yeah, Crow is dodgy. I'm going to wrench him right now because he's so dodgy. Just hit him with a wrench. Let's see. And of course I have to do that on YouTube, so anything going on other things like DLive and Twitch, those will have to be just the way they are, because I can't even bother about working with those. So anyway, everybody should be blue now. Yeah, new channel name, new branding, if you want to call it that. I don't sell anything, but it's what they call it. So that's what we're doing, and I don't have my fancy intro outro because Chow is working on doing that with the new the new name and look and all that. So that's what's going on. And as you can see, we're going to be doing lesson 8, Triumph to Trial. And as I'm going along, I've been, making these lessons, I've been kind of writing it as a composite New Testament. So those are the basic passages. Sometimes I add or change those. So that's more or less a guideline per the Pirates of the Caribbean statement. More guidelines than rules. And so we'll see how this goes. But you also notice a new feature where whoever I have in my Discord live stream, when they're talking, their avatar pops up over top the top of the blue chat box there you see on the right. And yeah, I moved those to the right. So let me see if I think I've got everybody wrenched so far. All right, so, and it says sign into chat on this thingy I'm looking at. I don't even know why that's up. I got too many chats rolling here. Yep, that's me, Dom. You got me. Shadowy figure. And having to manually scroll that blue chat is really annoying. Someday I'll have to look into that and find out what's the matter with it. But anyhow, good to see everybody, and we will get started. Like I said, if you just got here, we have a pop-up for when I'm speaking. That's a Discord feature. Finally got that to work. So if anyone else were to join me on panel, they would pop up too, only when they're speaking, and you would see who it is. If you can read it over top the other thing. I didn't, when I designed my new layout, I'm like, I didn't think about where I was going to put that. So anyway, that's where it's going to be for now. So we will get started. We're doing, and let me post a link here. I think that's the one I want. That should be going to an article called "Is the Passover the First Day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread?" I have it very abbreviated, but that's kind of some source material that I'll be using. Along with, also, let me get my chart that I always use on crucifixion chronology. So, and last but not least, we get this link for my outline on all of that. So there you go, lots of source material. Probably not going to post that again because it's too hard. So anyway, triumphal entry, so-called. Whether it was a Saturday or Sunday is a topic for another time. We'll get into a little more of the timing issue next week, especially with that chart that I posted. I'm not going to go too deep into this today. I don't know why I thought I had that blown up, but it unblowed itself. So I have stuff on the right for, source material, and we're going to be mainly doing Gethsemane, Last Supper, Gethsemane, and the trials during the night, and then they get to the Sanhedrin, then Pilate, then Herod, back to Pilate, and he's presented, and then up to the crucifixion. So we're not going to go into the rest of this right now, but this is something new that I came across the other day, which is that, I was kind of not solid on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which was preparation, because there's a couple different contexts for Preparation Day. And it seems to me from one of those links, the first one I posted, that there were two Passover suppers on the 14th of Nisan. One was done in individual homes on the 14th. This is, what you'll find in the source material. It was done in each individual home, right, originally? And a lot of people did that. There was no way they could kill all the lambs for all the people in the allotted time if it was all done in one spot. So that wasn't practical anyway, but it's one of those things that came up, people make allowances for situations. And so there was another one, a temple celebration, where lambs were killed as well, on kind of a national official priestly basis. So that's why there were two Passovers, because this second one would be when Jesus was on the cross, being crucified, and they wanted to go see Pilate about certain things, and they wouldn't go into the building because they didn't want to be unclean so they could eat the Passover. Well, Jesus already ate it, so people are confused, and so it turns out there's two celebrations on the 14th, but it's still the 14th. Everything from the Last Supper to the burial is one day, one Hebrew day, okay, because it started at sundown and it went to the next sundown. So that's all on one day, and we have to remember that. But what we're going to cover today is starting with the triumphal entry, which is the 10th of Nisan. If we go back to here for a second. I know some of this is blurry. I need to redo this chart, but on the 10th day of the first month, Nisan or Abib, take a lamb and observe it till the 14th day, and then slaughter it at twilight. Must be eaten that same night. So, the 10th is when the lambs were there under observation, okay? So, observation is a big deal, and I will give Emilu a wrench. So, we know you're a legitimate person. That's one of the best uses, I think, of wrenches is everybody knows who's a real account, and because if somebody fakes your account, then they won't have a wrench. Even though they'll have your name and avatar, they won't have your wrench, so we can keep them straight. Anyway, so Jesus was being observed. He had to come on the 10th to be observed, right? So this was the 10th of Nisan. This is a timing issue, right? Things to pay attention to when you're reading and learning how to study the Bible and learning to ask questions, like I was saying last time. So they got near Jerusalem. They came to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus sent out two disciples with these instructions: go to the village, and you'll find a donkey and her colt that no one has ever ridden. Untie the colt and bring that to me. If anybody asks you, you tell them Master needs it. We'll return it shortly. And they'll let it go. And he did this to fulfill a prophecy deliberately. Your king is coming to you riding on a colt of a donkey. So this is both a prophecy and a miracle. Sometimes it's hard to, I don't know why you didn't have a wrench, Crystal, but sometimes it's hard to classify things. When I did some on parables and some on miracles and some on prophecies, sometimes they're all rolled into one. So this is kind of one of those things. Jesus is making a prophecy and working a miracle. Okay, yeah. You and your multiple accounts. I guess I only found the one. So anyway, so that's what's going on here, obviously, and he has to be presented to Israel on the 10th as the sacrificial lamb. So, and then it says the disciples went off and did as he told them, found everything as he said, and they put their garments on it, kind of like a makeshift saddle, I guess you could say. Yeah, 2 wrenches, 2 accounts. You'll have to get 2 accounts if you want 2 wrenches, and I would find that confusing, but that's just me. Got enough to do already. His disciples didn't know it at the time, but when Jesus was exalted, that is to say, he was raised from the dead, they remembered these things that the people did that were written about him. And you can read it the other way too, written about him. So these things didn't occur to them while they were happening, but later on they looked back on this event and said, the light bulb went on and they said, oh yeah, okay, he fulfilled that thing we always read in the scriptures. So that's what's going on with him riding a donkey. And also, it was prophesied, as it says, up here, that this is how their king would come. So they're greeting him as the king, and he's not riding a white steed of a conqueror. He's coming, very humbly, it says, lowly. So that happened, and then many in the crowd spread out their cloaks on the road in front of him. Others used tree branches. In front and behind him were saying, celebrate the descendant of David. Blessed is the one bearing the name of the Master and the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. So they recognized him as the Messiah who would come and fulfill the promises to David. And that's another topical study on covenants and things. But there were promises, unilateral promises made to King David that, we'll, like I said, we'll cover some other time. But the thing is that they recognize this. There are people who will say that nobody in that century was waiting for a Messiah figure. Clearly they were. They wouldn't have done these things. They wouldn't have just seen some guy riding a donkey and think, well, let's go hail this person as our king. And remember when Jesus was presented at the temple, there was a man and a woman, prophets at the temple who, at least explicitly for the man, were expecting the consolation of Israel. So, yeah, they knew. Some of them were paying attention and expecting him. And when they did see him doing this, a lot more people were showing that they expected him. So, and then it says, when he entered Jerusalem, this entire city was shaken. And some said, who is this? And the crowd said, this is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee. But the Pharisees said, teacher, rebuke your disciples. And Jesus replied, I say to you, that if these people were silent, the stones themselves would shout. I kid you not. Yes, Palm Sunday. I kid you not, there are people who say that this means there's no genetic line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that we can just substitute anybody now. Talk about out of context. Jesus is simply saying, and I think it was a fulfillment of prophecy, if I remember right, that this praise was going to happen to fulfill it no matter what. All right? And why was there a crowd there, just seeing the guy riding on the donkey? The crowd that had been there when he called Lazarus out of the grave and raised him from the dead was giving their testimony. It's on their account of this miracle he did that a huge crowd went to meet him. So that's your answer as to why the people would crowd around him. There were people who saw him raise Lazarus from the dead who were spreading the word, and that's why when they saw him coming, they went out to see him, right? And it's Passover. There's a lot of people in Jerusalem. So then as he came closer and saw the city, though, I skipped a part. The Pharisees are muttering to themselves, we're not getting anywhere. What good is this doing us? The whole world has gone after him. So they're all jelly. Then as Jesus got closer and saw the city, he began to sob over it. If only you'd realized that in this day you would have had peace, yet now it is hidden from your eyes. So, again, they should have known he was coming. We have the prophecy of Daniel, where it said that after 69 weeks the prince would come and then he would be cut off, and then we have the prophecy in Isaiah 53. So they had no excuses really for not knowing, but he's saying, here I've been in these last few years presenting the kingdom of God to you, offering it to you as if they would go straight to the millennium, all those promises be fulfilled, and they wouldn't have it. So he's pretty bent up about that right now. The day will come when your enemies will throw siege ramps all around you and press in on you from all sides. They'll destroy you and your children. They won't leave one stone on top of another. This was fulfilled 40 years later, 70 AD, by the Roman general Titus and his armies. Because you were oblivious to the time you were to be set free. I think there are a lot of Christians today who are oblivious to the prophetic times we're living in, either because they don't care what the Bible says, or they think that all prophecy has been fulfilled, or they think, like it says in, I think, 2 Peter, scoffers will come saying, where is this coming that he promised? Everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation. So there's three possible reasons, that Christians today are oblivious to the time they're living in. So we're no better than these people of the first century who should have been expecting him. We should be expecting him again, and we shouldn't be caught off guard. Then Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple compound, and it was late, so he went to Bethany with the 12. So, any comments or questions on the triumphal entry? Like I said, it was the lamb, the sacrificial lamb, being presented on the 10th, so we know that's the 10th, and he would be sacrificed on the 14th. Okay? Any questions about that before we go on? Trying to look in the chats here. I've got 3 chat windows for some reason. Like I said, one of them popped up in OBS, and I don't know why, and it says I'm not even signed in, so I can't comment there, but too bad for them. I don't know. I work around it. Yes, people are optimistically ignorant. It's amazing the ability people have. So, to be oblivion, it's a term from, I forget who it was at Fox News years ago, made up the term oblivions. People who are just utterly unconcerned, unaware, ignorant of their surroundings and the times they live in. And if they were really, really dangerously oblivious, he called them obliviots. So, I did not make up those terms, but anyway, they exist. So, yes, amen, he triumphed over sin and death for us. So, he's being presented as a sacrificial lamb. All right, so I don't see any questions, so we will go on to the Last Supper. And this is where that one link that I posted earlier comes in about whether or not this is the Passover, because there were 2 on the 14th. All right. And I'll just show that again, just in case you weren't here then. This is Nisan 14, starts and ends at sundown. So a lot of things happened on the 14th. The Last Supper was the first event. The 13th, the day when they purged the yeast from their houses. Usually they, did that. And then the Last Supper was started the 14th. That was the individuals' Passover. And then, like I said, there'd be a national temple Passover at the end of the 14th, which is the next evening, 24 hours later. So anyway, on the day before the feast, and that's part of this article that I read too, it doesn't mean, the figure of speech doesn't always mean right on exactly that day. There's a little leeway in the terms. So by context, all the context in the Gospels, it's the day before the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because unleavened bread starts on the 15th. Okay? Feast of Unleavened Bread, and you have a special Sabbath on the 1st and 7th day where nobody could work. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the 15th, you couldn't do any work. On 15th starts unleavened bread for 7 days, with first and last a special Sabbath. That's Leviticus 23:5-21. So we have to keep that in mind, especially next week. We get more into how many days and nights he was in the tomb, because the 15th was a day nobody could work, and that's a big deal when it comes to burial and preparing spices, buying and preparing spices for burial, which the women did. So anyway, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So all those things, the things we're going over today, will all happen on one day. Excuse me. So on the day before the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which was the first, the individual Passover, when the Passover lamb was to be killed, the disciples asked Jesus, where do you want us to prepare to eat the Passover? Obviously, they were doing this, when they could do work, which you could do on the Passover itself. Okay? But the 14th was the Passover, not the 15th. Okay. So, he sent out 2 of his disciples, told them, go to the city. You see someone carrying a pitcher of water, follow them, and when they enter a house, tell the owner, the teacher wants to know where the reception room is so he can eat the Passover meal with the disciples. You'll be shown a large furnished upper story room. Prepare it for us there. And the disciples found everything as he said and prepared it. So another prophecy/miracle. First we had it with the donkey and the colt, and then now we have it with the upper room. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table. You know those pictures you've all seen from the medieval times or whatever era it was painted, where they're all sitting at a nice table, all on one side, so you can see the faces, sitting at a table with a nice cloth on it and all that stuff. They reclined at very short little tables. They sat on the ground on pillows and kind of reclined, all right? That's how they sat at the table. So he's eating the Passover meal, right? And then he said to them, I have greatly desired to eat this Passover with you before my time of suffering. While they were eating, Jesus picked up the bread and blessed it and handed it to his disciples and said, take this and eat it. It is my body. Just goes without saying, but can't, for obvious reasons. Jesus is sitting there in his mortal body, unsacrificed at this time, saying, this bread is my body. Not possible for it to be literally his body. As a literalist, we take context into consideration, and obviously, since he's sitting there in his body intact, the bread was not his literal body. It didn't become his body. He didn't say magic words and make it his body. So this is obviously a representative or token or symbol of his body being sacrificed, tearing apart the bread and passing it around. This is how they were participating in this remembrance of what hadn't even happened yet, because he was saying, do this to remember me. So literal, consistent interpretation says this was not his literal body. It didn't become that. It couldn't have. Then he picked up the cup, gave thanks, handed it to his disciples, and said, drink from this, all of you, because this is my blood. Same thing there. With this, my blood, I am signing the new covenant. Okay, so another day and time we'll go over covenants. But the thing is, new covenant signed in his blood. All right? If you saw my debate a few weeks back from, that I did, that I broadcast on my channel on the nature of the Messiah, I went into a lot more detail on this big deal about covenants. So I want to watch that. My presentation starts about a half hour in if you wanted to skip to that, but I recommend watching the whole thing. Anyway, he signs the new covenant, and his blood is being poured out for many to dismiss the charges against them. Only God can do that. With absolute certainty, I tell you that from now on I will not drink the fruit of the vine until, it doesn't say again, not in the Greek, until the day comes when I drink it fresh in the kingdom of my Father. What he's talking about there is the millennial kingdom, because I don't think there's a lot of wine drinking going on in heaven. All right, and a wrench for infinite reach, because pretty sure nobody has cloned his account yet, so we do that as soon as possible. Anyway, then he exclaimed, I tell you truly that one of you will betray me. Now also, if there are 2 incidents where the disciples were arguing about who was the greatest, I think it's the Gospel of John that has them doing that here at the Last Supper, believe it or not. So just FYI. But anyway, the topic right now is just that he says, one of you betray me, and they said, I'm not the one, am I, Master? And now one of them, the one Jesus loved, which is a euphemism the Apostle John uses to refer to himself, was reclining near him. Then Simon Peter motioned to him to ask what this was all about. So he leaned close to Jesus and asked, Master, who is it? It's the one to whom I will give the morsel of bread after dipping it. That's what they did. They dipped their bread into a meat sauce or something like that, right? And so this was something they would do as a course of the, not just the Passover meal, but a lot of meals, okay? So he's saying, I will indicate who the traitor is by when I dip this bread into the dipping sauce, I'm going to hand it to that person, okay? And he dipped it and gave it to the traitor Judas, son of Simon of Kerioth. That's what Iscariot means in some of the translations. Immediately Satan entered into him, and he asked Jesus, I'm not the one, am I, Rabbi? Probably sarcastically. You said it yourself, Jesus replied. What you're about to do it faster. None of those at the table realized why Jesus said this to Judas. Some presume that since Judas was responsible for the group's funds, and as another passage says, he was in the habit of stealing money from it, Jesus was telling him to buy whatever they would need for the festival or give something to the poor. They didn't know why he said that, but John the disciple knew. And because he had told him, I'm, whoever I hand this bread to. So as soon as he got the morsel of bread, Judas went out, and it was nighttime. Back to this little chart here. So Last Supper is after dark, starts at the 14th. Then Jesus continued, what has been written about the human being, that human being taken away, which is the Son of Man. That's what Son of Man means, human. Being taken away will surely happen to him, but woe to the person who is responsible for having him arrested. It would be better if they had never been born. So Judas is filled with Satan and then goes out to betray him and get the posse after him. And Jesus is saying it would be better for him if he had never been born. So, before the Passover festival, that would be it's saying before because there were, a big festival rather than the individual things. Jesus had already been keenly aware that the hour had come for him to move from this world to the Father. He was filled with love for his own in the world, and he loved them to the end. Now, knowing that the Father had given everything into his hands and that he had gone out from God and would soon return, there's another divinity statement. He came from God and would return. He rose up from dinner, removed his outer garments, wrapped himself in a towel, and then filled a basin with water and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he was wearing. This is the job of a household servant. Okay, so he's the lowest of servants doing this, right? When he came to Simon Peter, he objected, Master, you're washing my feet. And Jesus answered, right now you don't know what I'm doing, but you will see it eventually. Peter still objected. You should absolutely never wash my feet. But if I don't, Jesus replied, you're not in with me. And then Master, exclaimed Simon Peter, not just my feet, but my hands and my head. But Jesus explained, the one who has bathed only needs their feet washed, since they're completely clean, and you are all clean. Well, not all. He said that because he knew who was betraying him. But here's the big deal, which is why one of the accounts has the disciples arguing over who was greater. When he finished washing their feet, he put on his outer garments again and reclined at the table. Do you realize what I've done to you? Jesus asked them. You address me as teacher and master, rightly so. But if I, your master and teacher, wash your feet, that is to say, stoop to the lowest position, you too should wash each other's feet. I grew up in a denomination that literally did that to err on the side of caution. And yet the context is clear. This is an act of servitude. Okay, I've got a comment. I don't know, you guys can deal with it. Plenty of mods around to take care of that. I'm not sure, just keep an eye out. You two should wash each other's feet. So you two should do what I did. Step from the loftiest position down to the lowest. I have given you an example to follow. You must do as I did. I tell you truly that a slave is not greater than their master, nor is the one sent greater than the one sending. If you see what I'm saying and put it into practice, you'll be happy. So he's, again, reiterating the teaching we learned in an earlier lesson, that the greatest must be the least. Who is greater, the waiter or the one at the table? It's obviously the one at the table. And Jesus said in that context, since I, your master and savior, am waiting on you, then you should wait on each other. Okay? They sang a song, went out to the Mount of Olives. And then Jesus said to them, all of you will fall into a trap tonight on my account. It is written, I will strike the shepherd and the whole flock of sheep will scatter. But when I'm raised up, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. So this wasn't the end. They should have known. He told them he would rise from the dead more than once. But it's kind of hard to remember when the stuff is happening right in front of you. That's just how people are. So, any comments or questions on what was going on here at the Last Supper? It started with the miraculous prophecy of having a room available, and then he was betrayed by Judas, and then Jesus talked about it'd be better if he hadn't been born. And then he realized, the time had come for him to go back where he came from, which was heaven. And he made this lesson for those who would be his inner circle, the 12, who would be as I said, the kind of interface between Old Testament and New as far as prophecy is concerned. So he's saying this is an example of what the leaders do. So yes, you'll be leaders, but you have to be servants. Okay? So, yeah, totally unprecedented. As Jesus said in those other contexts, that in the world, there are, the people in charge call themselves benefactors and top-down command, but he said not to be that way among you. So this is his, very clear object lesson in how this works. Okay, so he took a very humble position, even though he was their Lord and Savior, and he said, do this. If you want to be, you're going to be leaders, you have to understand this lesson, which is why Peter had to take part in it. Okay? So, any other comments or questions on that whole Last Supper scene, which was just the beginning of Nisan 14 in the biblical Hebrew calendar? I'm not seeing a whole lot in the way of questions. Yeah, Canaanite didn't seem like terribly sincere, but we'll see how they are when they come back after 5 minutes. All right, so let's go to arrest and trials. Jesus took them to a place called Gethsemane on the other side of the brook in Kedron. It was a place the traitor Judas was familiar with since Jesus took his disciples there often. That's how he knew where to go, because he had left before they went out here. Oh, you have a question? Okay. Well, waiting for a question. And, all right. I'll try to look back for it. I don't want to leave too much dead air. He told his disciples to wait here while I go over a distance to pray. He took along Peter and Zebedee's 2 sons, which is James and John. He became very sad and depressed, said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He went a short distance more, fell on his face, praying, "My Father, if possible, let this cup pass from me, but what matters is what you want, not what I want." Then he returned, found them sleeping, and said to Peter, "Couldn't you keep watch with me for 1 hour? Pray that you'll not be put to the test. The spirit is eager, but the flesh is weak." Obviously, this is going to be a big deal. But remember, he left all the disciples except for these 3, and then left those 3. So we came back to those 3 and said that. Let's see, question: could Jesus have foreseen an alternative path, yet chose this one due to some priority? Hard to say, but I think overall, what confuses people the most is that he's praying to the Father, not my will, but your will. And they completely forget that he added human nature to God nature when he was incarnated. You can read that in Philippians 2:5-11, where he thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but, and he humbled himself and became human. So that's the human Jesus praying to God. And by example, he always taught them to pray, our Father in heaven. He's being the example, okay? So anyway, just to clear up that thing, because people will mock and say, well, how could Jesus be God if he prayed to God? But it is, he's praying to the Father, and nobody says the Father is the Son. So anyway. But yeah, there's, hard to say from the text and what he's talking about as far as, what's the gospel accounts give us. There must be a reason he asked, okay? But obviously, if there was another way, a better way, God would have taken that path already, so anyway, it was bound to happen. So anyway, he goes away to pray again and says the same thing, and he found the disciples sleeping again, and they had nothing to say to him for falling asleep again, so he gave up on them and went off to pray a third time. Then he returned and said, "You're going to sleep forever? Look, the hour has come, and the human is betrayed into the hands of scoundrels. Wake up. Let's go. Here comes my betrayer." So, yeah, who knows all the reasons it had to be this way, but we know that this was already known from earliest times, from the foundation of the world. God knew this in advance, so it was going to happen. So anyway, let's see. I'm not familiar with. I'll go ahead and wrench Mike Dorman and hope that not somebody's clone account. I have to be real careful on. That's what I'm doing with wrenches, making sure it's not a clone account or, as I said earlier, a dodgy person who may or may not cause issues. Anyway, while he was speaking to his disciples, Judas showed up with a bunch of deputies from the ruling priests and Pharisees carrying torches and weapons. He had arranged the sign, "Whoever I greet affectionately is the one that we arrest him." And so he greeted Jesus affectionately. And Jesus came out and asked and knew what was going on. "What are you doing here, friend? Who are you looking for? Who are you all looking for?" So he says, "What are you doing here, friend?" to Judas, and then turns to the rest of them and says, "Who are you all looking for?" It's plural in the Greek there. "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied, and he responded, "I am." It doesn't say "I am he." You could make a case for inferring it, but it's not there. All right. So he said, "I am," and the traitor Judas was standing with them. But as Jesus said, "I am," they all drew back and fell to the ground. Doesn't sound like a normal reaction to someone just saying, "I am he." So this is why I didn't put it in my translation. Some translations do. I say, "I am he," but this tells you it shouldn't say that because he's claiming to be "I am." Okay. So he repeated the question, "Who you're looking for?" They replied again, "Jesus of Nazareth," and Jesus responded, "I told you that I am, and if I'm the one you want, let these others go." He said this to fulfill what he said before, "I will not lose one of those you have given me." So that tells you what he was talking about when he said, "I've lost none of them." Okay? He's not talking about the eternal salvation we're guaranteed post-Pentecost. We have to always keep the context in mind. So suddenly, one of those with Jesus, Peter, reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck Malchus, the deputy of the ruling priest, cutting off his right ear. "Sheath your sword," said Jesus. "Those who live by swords will die by swords. Don't you realize that I could say the word and my Father would put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But then how would the scriptures be fulfilled? This has to happen. I must drink from the cup the Father has given me." Okay, so there's another miracle and prophecy all over the place. So then he says, "You came to me with swords and clubs to arrest me as if I'm some kind of robber, but every day I sat in the temple compound and taught, and you didn't arrest me then. Yet all this happened in order to fulfill what the prophets wrote." So again, fulfilling prophecy, not just making prophecies, but fulfilling them. At that point, all his disciples took off and ran away. There was also a youth among them, and he was wearing nothing but, the word in Greek, fancy pajamas. And they seized him, but he slipped out of pajamas and ran away naked. I don't know why that needs to be in the story, but there it is. One of the, things that tell you that nobody's making this up. Then the garrison and the commander with the Judean deputies seized Jesus and tied him up. That is to say, temple police. They took him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the ruling or high priest that year. This was the Caiaphas who had earlier advised the Judeans, the Jews, that it would be to their advantage to let one person die for the people. Another unwitting prophecy here. And let's see, hold on, what's going on in the chat? Avatars is kind of a new agey term, but we are his representatives. That's as far as I can go with biblically, is to say we're his representatives. So we do have to be careful with how things sound sometimes. Scripture scholars and elders had already gathered with Annas. So this was all, of course, planned. Judas had gone out and done what he did and got them to go arrest him. He was paid 30 pieces of silver to betray him. Peter and another disciple known to the ruling priest, that would be the Apostle John again, had been following at a distance right up to the courtyard. Peter waited outside the gate, but then the one who knew the ruling priest, and again, John the disciple, spoke to the gatekeeper to let Peter in. He went inside and sat with the deputies to wait for a verdict. Meanwhile, the ruling priest and the whole Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, tried to produce false witnesses against Jesus. So they were looking for just about anybody to say anything as an excuse to convict him, to get him executed. But though many false witnesses came forward, they couldn't find anything because their testimonies conflicted. That turns out it didn't stop them. Finally, 2 of them came forward and said, "We heard him claim that he was going to demolish the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." Then the ruling priest stood up and asked Jesus, "What have you nothing to say about this accusation that these 2 brought?" But he said nothing. So the priest said, "I am putting you under oath before the living God." That is what they would say, give glory to God. That's what they were doing, putting you under oath to tell us if you are the anointed, the God-man, the Son of the Blessed One. So when it comes to do not take oaths, what Jesus had said earlier, he's talking in that context about taking flippant oaths that we don't intend to keep. Okay, obviously here he's in basically a court of law and being told to swear that he will tell the truth. And he did it, just to make that point. So are you the anointed one, the Messiah, the Christ, the God-man, the Son of the Blessed One? And he's replied, "You said it yourself. Furthermore, I assure you that after this you will see the humans sitting down to the right of the power," which is another respectful euphemism for God, "coming in the clouds of the sky." At this, the ruling priest tore his tunic in absolute grief and exclaimed, "He has defamed God." That's what blasphemy is. "Why do we need any further testimony? You've heard it yourselves. What's your verdict?" "He deserves the death penalty," they all replied. They spat in his face, and while they were beating and slapping him, they mocked, "Prophesy, anointed one, who hit you?" So obviously they covered him up so he couldn't see who hit him, covered his face. But the point is here, they're taking this as a claim to be divine, claim to be God. Meanwhile, this beating was going on, and Peter was in the courtyard with the deputies and servants standing around a fire. Suddenly the gatekeeper, a servant girl, came up to him and said, "You were with Jesus the Galilean. You're not one of his disciples, are you?" But he denied it in front of them all. "I don't know what you're talking about." He went out the gate. So that was in the courtyard. Then he goes out the gate. Another one saw him and said to the others there, "This one was with Jesus the Nazarene." Again, he denied it. "I swear I don't know who that is." Short time later, others standing there came up to Peter and said, "You have to be one of them. Your accent gives you away." He was from Galilee and not Jerusalem. Evidently, that was enough distance to make a difference in accents. And then Peter began to curse and swear, "I don't know the guy." And immediately a rooster crowed. Then he remembered what Jesus had said before the rooster crows. This was before they got to Jerusalem, and he had said that he would die, and they said they would die with him. And he had also said, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. So Peter remembered this and went outside weeping bitterly. Okay, so far they've had the Last Supper, they've gone to the garden, Jesus prayed fervently, the mob came to arrest him, they took him to the Sanhedrin, accused him of claiming to be God, beat him up, and then at dawn they're going to take him to the council, convened with all the ruling priests and elders. In other words, the stuff they did during the night was illegitimate. It was illegal, even by any conceivable rule. Having a trial and a beating in the middle of the night was obviously against all the laws of Moses or otherwise. Okay, so they did all that and then brought him to the council to have to decide how to have Jesus executed, because they were under the thumb of Rome and they couldn't just go out and do that. Now there's mob violence, like when later on after Jesus ascended and the first martyr named Stephen was stoned to death. That's mob violence more, because they didn't have Rome's permission. Apparently they didn't care at that point. But in this case, they wanted Rome to do it. That's why they're going through all this. So they tied him up and handed him over to Governor Pilate. When the traitor Judas saw this, he was filled with remorse and tried to return the 30 pieces of silver to the ruling priests and elders. "I've betrayed innocent blood." So he's having remorse. "What is that to us?" they retorted. "That's your problem." So Judas flung the silver in the temple, went off and hanged himself. Now, in Acts, it explains further that he used the money or the priest used the money later to buy his field where he died. And it adds that he fell and splattered. These are not in conflict. Evidently, he did a poor job of hanging himself, and his body fell and he splattered. So he intended to die by hanging. Whether he did or not is beside the point. He was dead one way or another. He was twice dead, you could say. But that's not a contradiction in the scriptures, just to make that point. So he flung the money at them, went off and hanged himself. The ruling priest picked up the silver and said, "We can't use this as a gift offering because it's blood money." Here they are in their insane legalism. Suddenly they want to obey the law. They've had illegal trials during the night. And suddenly they're like, we can't use this money to put back in the treasury because of what it was used for. So all of a sudden they're concerned with legalism. So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field, which would then serve as a graveyard for foreigners. So it was known from then on as the field of blood. This fulfilled what was said by the prophet Jeremiah. They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price agreed upon by the people of Israel, and bought the potter's field as my master instructed. So a prophecy fulfilled from the prophet Jeremiah. The price of a slave is what 30 pieces of silver was. And so he's fulfilling that in another way. And by the time they took Jesus to the governor, it was morning. So this was, barely the sun starting to come up when they did this. But by the time it was actually morning, they didn't enter the compound because it would make them ritually unclean. Okay, so I was thinking he was already in a cross, but I wasn't sure. No, they didn't enter the compound when they were trying to get him on trial by Rome because they would be unclean for the Passover, the second one on the 14th. So he came out to them and said, "What is the charge?" And they said, "Well, if he weren't a criminal, we wouldn't have brought him here." So they're being evasive. And so Pilate says, "Well, then take him and judge him by your own law." Then they said, "But we're not allowed to execute anyone." This fulfilled what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was about to die, because they knew Rome would crucify him. That's the death they wanted for him, and why they're pleading with Rome. The Jews are trying to convince Pilate that he should do this. So, that's why they're hemming and hawing about this and trying to get him to do something he really doesn't have any obligation to do. Okay, just a comment. Once a Jewish friend of the show said his favorite derogatory name to be called was God Killer. Had God killed her, would have been more accurate, but far less boasty. Okay. Let's see. Can we deduce if those who beat up Jesus understood what they did soon after? Certainly a lot of people converted by the time Jesus rose from the dead and went back to heaven. We know that there were thousands who converted on the day of Pentecost, which was 7 weeks later from the first day of the week after the Passover was the wave offering, and that's the first of the 7 weeks. So you count off 50 days and have another festival at the end. That was Pentecost. Okay, so eventually by then there would be, thousands of people who would convert. But to say the first Christians technically happened at Pentecost, so there were thousands all at once. Obviously the disciples were first, they had the Holy Spirit first, and then immediately after were all these converts. So the disciples were the first technical Christians. Okay. Anyway, the Jews are, twisting Pilate's arm. He agitates the people with the teachings all over Judea from here to Galilee. When Pilate heard this, he wanted to know whether Jesus was a Galilean. He's trying to get off on a legal loophole. Once he found out he was under the jurisdiction of Herod, he sent him to him since he was in Jerusalem at the time. Now, Herod found out about this. He was very pleased because for a long time he wanted to meet Jesus since he had heard so much about him. He especially wanted to see Jesus perform a miracle. He wanted to see him do tricks. But though he asked him many questions, Jesus did not respond. Then the ruling priests and scripture scholars standing there began to accuse him vigorously, shouting accusations. Even Herod and his troops joined in the jeering, and when they dressed him up in fancy clothes and sent him back to Pilate, on that very day, Herod and Pilate became friends. They were bitter enemies before. So he's been, at this trial during the mock trial during the night when he was beaten and mocked, and then taken to Pilate, who sent him to Herod, trying to get rid of him, and Herod and his troops do the same mockery, and then he sends him back to Pilate. And he calls for Jesus and says, "So, you're king of the Jews then?" And Jesus says, "Do you say this on your own, or this is what somebody put you up to?" He says, "I'm not a Judean, am I? And your own people and ruling priest handed you over to me, so what did you do?" And Jesus replied, my kingdom is not of this world, which, again, people take out of context and say, well, there will never be a literal physical kingdom of Israel on the earth again. Context is everything. I'm not going to even chase that down right now. The point here is, if it had been of this world, my slaves, my servants would have fought to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. No, my kingdom is not from here. So he's saying he's no threat to Pilate. So you are a king then, Pilate asked. You say I'm a king, Jesus replied, but I was born into this and have come into the world to testify to the truth. And everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And then Pilate just, what is truth, and walked away. And with that, he went out to the Jews and told them, I can't find a single thing to charge him with. In fact, neither did Herod, who sent him back to me. So my finding is that he has done nothing worthy of the death penalty. I will have him punished and then released. Now the ruling priests and elders were hurling many accusations, but Jesus made no response. So Pilate asked, don't you hear all the charges they're making? Yet he said nothing, which mystified him. And the governor had a custom of releasing one prisoner of the crowd's choosing during the festival. There happened to be a notorious prisoner called Barabbas, which I think in one account his first name was Jesus Barabbas. So he's like, you want this Jesus or that Jesus? He had been jailed for committing rebellion and murder during some revolts. So when everyone was there, Pilate said, which one do you want? And he knew very well it was out of envy that Jesus had been handed over, but the priest had incited the crowd to ask for Barabbas to be released instead. And while he was holding court, his wife sent a message to him, have nothing to do with that righteous person because I've had a terrible nightmare about him. Of course, this didn't matter to anybody. But God was even speaking through the wife of people who were not even Jews. So, yes, God can speak through people who are not his own. Doesn't mean that they're saved, but it does mean that sometimes God will speak through them. The ruling priests and elders had persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and have Jesus put to death. So when the governor asked them, which one do you want? They said Barabbas. So what should I do with Jesus, called the Anointed One, the King of the Jews? They said, crucify him. But why? Asked Pilate. What crime has he committed? He kept pressing them to answer the question, but they just shouted him down. So Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. He still hasn't committed. The soldiers weaved the crown out of thorns and placed it on Jesus' head. I gotta fix that backwards apostrophe there. They threw a purple cloak around him, as in royalty, because he's got a crown and a cloak, so they're dressing him up like a king. And they kept approaching him and saying, greetings, King of the Jews, and slapped him in the face. Then Pilate came out again and said, look, I'm taking him outside to you, so you know for sure that I have no grounds for charge. So he said, look, I went ahead and had him beaten and scourged and everything, or not scourged, but beaten and mocked, and so here he is. And the ruling priests saw him. Instead of having any kind of pity, they said, crucify. But he says, you do it. I don't have a reason. And the Jews replied, we have a law, and according to that law, he must be executed because he equated himself with God. So again, for the umpteenth time, hostile witnesses are saying that Jesus claimed to be God. So next time somebody tells you they never claimed that, here's one of the places where that happened. When Pilate heard this, he was afraid. Okay, so they're really twisting his arm hard. So he returned to the compound and asked Jesus, where you come from? But Jesus didn't answer. So Pilate said, you won't talk to me? Don't you realize that I have the jurisdiction to either release you or have you crucified? And Jesus said, you'd have no jurisdiction at all unless it had been given to you from above. However, the one turning me over to you has the greater sin. He may not just be talking about Judas there. He may be talking about the whole priesthood. From then on, Pilate looked for a way to release him. But the Jews shouted, if you ever release him, and this was the clincher, you will no longer be a friend of Caesar. This phrase indicates a certain position of privilege in the Roman government. Because anyone claiming to be a king is challenging Caesar's throne. Didn't matter, that Jesus had said, I'm no threat to you, my kingdom is not of this world. I'm not challenging anybody's throne. But they're saying, we can get you on this legal technicality. We'll say, it doesn't say what kind of king he's claiming to be. He's just saying, he's claiming to be a king. The law says you have to accept that this guy is challenging Caesar. So he leaves Jesus outside and then sat down on the seat known as the stone pavement, or locally as Gabbatha. It was still the preparation of the Passover, almost noon. And he said to the Jews, look at your king. Now, preparation of the Passover means that they hadn't they were still allowed to do things on this day. It's still the 14th. And so they're still preparing to do the Passover. But you could quibble about why does it say preparation? Is it the preparation before, for the sake of, or is it the preparation we do because it's Passover? Okay, so whichever way you want to take it. Almost noon. And there's good reason for saying this too. One passage says it was about the 3rd hour and the other the 6th hour. These hours, 3rd, 6th, 9th, were 3-hour spans. And one passage says 3rd hour and the other says almost the 6th. So it was the 3rd hour just toward the end of it. So almost noon. Okay, because you start counting from 6 a.m. So it was almost noon. Say probably around 11 a.m., which I have on this chart here. This is about the middle of this is the nighttime, and then about the middle of the day around here, he's presented to the crowd. So probably just short of noon, like 11 a.m., right? And let's see, where was I here? Almost noon, and he said to the Jews, "Look at your king," and they shouted, "Lift him up." Remember when Jesus was talking to Nicodemus and said, if I am lifted up, I will draw everyone to myself. That's what I had said he was using the phrase for crucifixion. Here it is. Lift him up, crucify him. Okay, so I didn't make that up. I got it from this definition here. Pilate asked, "You want me to crucify your king?" And they said, "We have no king but Caesar." So they're really twisting hard on this technical loophole where they're claiming their loyalty to Caesar as Jews, which would have gotten anybody else their ire, so they're complete hypocrites. But they're doing this for the purpose of twisting Pilate's arm. Okay? That's all this is about. And when Pilate saw that it was pointless and that the people were on the verge of rioting, he took some water, washed his hands in front of them all, and said, "I hereby declare to you that I am not guilty of this person's blood." And all the people stupidly said, "May his blood be on our hands and on the hands of our children." Talk about cursing your progeny. I mean, it doesn't get any worse than that. So, next time we will go into what happens after the crucifixion, burial, resurrection, and that will be the last of the covering of the Gospels. Okay, even though I don't know, I may include part of the first chapter of Acts where he says his final things before he is ascended. So I might take it that far. It seems to go with it, but anyway. And another blue name to do here. God didn't make them say these things. Predicting something is not the same as forcing it to happen. There's no point in saying God knows the future if he rigged it, So he knows these things would happen. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the, how God knows the future right now, but excuse me. So anyway, they brought this curse on themselves and their progeny. And like Jesus had said, they were going to be destroyed, not forever. The Bible makes it clear that it's not forever. 40 years later, they would be ransacked by Titus and his armies, and they have been scattered ever since. Yes, there is, I guess you could say, a remnant there right now, but they had to be there because more prophecy remains, and they have to be there in unbelief, which is exactly where they are. And for some reason, I know I gave P. Atchin a wrench, but it doesn't seem to be showing up, and I don't know why. And again, those wrenches, the blue names, are for protecting you against clone accounts, people impersonating other people. Any comments or questions about this whole section? This is the last one we're doing today, arrest and trials. He was, betrayed by Judas. He had gone to pray. This is not where his sacrifice was made, as the Mormons like to say that his, because I didn't include the part about, being so distressed that he sweat great drops of blood. I'll include that. Hopefully I'll remember to put that in when I do the book I'm working on. It doesn't mean that that's where he paid for the sins of the world. This was on the cross. And so that happened, and then, all his disciples ran away. Peter and John, however, came to his trial, at least stood outside, and they accused him of blasphemy, claiming to be God. They twisted Pilate's arm to get him crucified, to get him condemned at least. We haven't gotten to the crucifixion part. Both Herod and Pilate were, making that happen. And then the rest we'll go over next week. So, questions or comments on this part? Because we have it nicely fit into the hour as usual. We're, of course, a couple minutes over, but anything to say? Any either that section or the rest of them? As for anything that's unclear, did I go too fast? Anything like that? I probably have my mic turned up a little too loud, but I forgot to check it earlier. Do you think there is evidence that Pilate's curse stuck? Can you elaborate on Pilate's curse? Oh, you mean a curse against Pilate? Because I don't see a curse on Pilate. He says, I'm not guilty of this person's blood. And they accepted that. The people of Israel accepted it. May his blood be on our hands and on the hands of our children. So they and all their progeny would be accepting guilt for putting Jesus to death. Okay, what Pilate said to the people about washing his hands of it, is that what you mean? Because I'm hopefully I just explained what I think your question was. Because, like I said, the people of Israel, even if he had brought a curse on himself, the people of Israel took it on themselves and their children. So I'm not quite sure what else you're asking. Oh, okay. Okay, on the hands thing, yeah. He washed his hands as a gesture and said, this isn't my fault. And they said, you're right, it's ours. We'll take all the blame, and we'll even blame our children after us. So, yeah, that's what's going on there. So, yeah, I'm hopefully not going too fast. But this, there's a lot in here, but it wasn't really hard to understand. It's just the sequence is the hardest thing about it. When did this happen? When did that happen? As you read, the separate Gospels. So, let's see. Talmud tradition teaches that proxy murder isn't accounted to you. Yeah. They took it on themselves. They said, we're fully responsible for this. And yeah. They took it on themselves, and obviously God took it seriously that they did that. I mean, yeah, I changed the channel name to Level Up, and I changed my avatar, my artwork, my custom channel name, which, you have to type, youtube.com/C/levelup777. I had to put a number on it because it turns out there's a gazillion level ups. Whatever. I don't usually bother to check before. But, yeah, it's Level Up 777 if you had to look up for it by custom channel name. But, anyway, you're here now, so the best thing to do is subscribe so you don't lose track of it, and then it'll be in your subscriptions. So yeah, this is it. This is the new home. And it didn't really move. It just got a facelift. So, that's all I have today. Unless you guys got some more. Yeah, library archive. No, the Level Up Library is the new name. In Discord, it used to be Bible Literalist Library, which I can't even say it, so that's one of the reasons I changed it. Level Up Library. It's still there. It's got a new avatar, so if you've got the white circle in your Discord list, it says Level Up. It has a little level on it. It's the same channel. So, yeah, it's a video game term. It's also about improving yourself. It's about all sorts of things. So, I thought it was a positive name and appropriate, and so that's what I did. Hey, Nathan, good to see you. Yes, this is my channel. And, yeah, thank you. I was hoping everybody would be happy with it. Like I said, I couldn't even say literalist half the time. And, it has so many layers of meaning. So that's what I did. Yeah, and technically, just as a little trivia, it's not a crucifix because we don't have Jesus on the cross, because as non-Catholics, we symbolize the fact that he was there, but he isn't anymore. He rose from the dead. So that's what the empty cross signifies to us. But yeah, I had to do that because I was looking around for ideas on how to stylize the word up, and a lot of them had these arrows in the middle. And I thought, you know what, I could just change that arrow void part in the middle to a cross shape, and it seemed to work pretty well. So, yeah. Yes, epic level. I tell people also, now that I'm old enough to get minimal Social Security income, that I have leveled up with an age achievement. So, just for being old, I got an achievement as far as the government's concerned. So, regarding Pilate, yes, he washed his hands of it, and it's still up here on the screen. He said, "I'm not guilty," and they, all the people, said, "May his blood be on our hands and on the hands of our children." So there you go. And yeah, and apparently, looking back on it over the past nearly 2,000 years since that happened, it's obvious that God took them up on their, held them to account for their little oath that they took there. Yep, they took it on themselves. So regardless of Talmudic tradition or Dante's Inferno or anything like that, where allegedly they had him forever washing his hands, Pilate, I don't think so. I mean, he tried and tried and tried to get out of it, and finally had enough of them, and it fulfilled prophecy anyway. But I don't think, he may have. I mean, I'm sure he had plenty of other things to be accountable for. But as for having Jesus crucified, Jesus said, "Woe to the one who betrayed me," which again could be just Judas, or it could be all the religious leaders, and by extension, all the people who said, who agreed to go along with them and said, "We're taking this curse on ourselves." So, that's how it's been. So, anyway, again, if you haven't seen the debate that I did on the biblical Messiah a while back, it still should be easy to find on my channel, and maybe Chow has the link, I don't know, for the debate before I shut down here, or otherwise I can go get it. But yeah, it's got a lot of good detail in it. There's been another challenge on whether Christians are under the laws of the Old Testament, but I am told them I am not ready for another debate so soon. It takes an awful lot of work and time, and I've got too many other things going right now. So anyway, yeah, come back next week and we will finish this up. And okay, Chow's got it. I was just going to go look in case he hadn't been able to find it. So there you have it. So check out the debate. Yes, it is a couple hours long. I meant to put timestamps in. I should probably do that sometime. Yeah, in my leisure moments, I will try to remember to put timestamps on that debate. All right. Thanks again, everybody. And if I can find, God, I move things around on my screen where all the things are that I need to do, which is usually hit the mute button, do my outro. But again, I'm not doing my intro outro today because it needs new branding. And that's, Chow was kind enough to do that before, so I think he's working on that again. So we'll just do the outsplash screen, I call it, and see you next week. Thanks again for coming.